One small thing can change the course of history forever. A driver takes a wrong turn in Sarajevo, placing Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the crosshairs of an assassin, and the world stumbles into the Great War.
History is filled with these hinge points,
where the slightest change could have put us on a timeline that would be unrecognizable to us now. Sports, by their very nature, are set up to have singular moments that alter history almost every year. Each season brings its own hinge point, a fleeting instant when history could fork, when narratives and legacies hang by a thread. For Mark Stoops and Kentucky football, that moment arrived on a brisk October day in 2022 at Vaught Hemingway Stadium in Oxford, Mississippi. One play where if the outcome was different, not only would Kentucky football's history be forever changed, but quite possibly the entire landscape of the collegiate sport, and maybe the world.
Okay, maybe not the world. I have narrowed Kentucky's change in trajectory down to 2 plays, and I find myself watching them over and over, stupidly hoping that at some point that the outcome will change. Like the very definition of insanity.
Before we get to that singular moment, let's provide some context. When Mark Stoops took over at Kentucky in 2012, the program was in shambles. In those early years, progress was glacial. A 2-win season, then 5, then another 5.
For his first 3 seasons, Stoops' troops only won a total of 3 SEC home games. Can you imagine that? Only winning 3 SEC home games in 3 years?
The pressure was on Stoops to get Kentucky bowl eligible, and with the help of Austin McGinnis, he did. Building off a couple 7-5 seasons, Kentucky put together a top 5 defense for 2018 and won 10 games for only the 3rd time in school history. Kentucky became known as a scrappy contender, capable of defying expectations. It was blue-collar, tough football, led by the Big Blue Wall. In 2019, when injuries forced the Wildcats to play wide receiver Lynn Bowden at quarterback, Stoops' team still won 8 games. The 2020 pandemic season disrupted momentum, but in 2021, Kentucky roared back, led by new quarterback Will Levis, offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, and transfer standout Wan'Dale Robinson. Another 10-win campaign restored the Wildcats to prominence. And when you consider the circumstances of 2019 and 2020, there is an argument that from 2018 to 2021, Mark Stoops and Kentucky's progress had not dipped at all. Suddenly, Kentucky football had some culture.
It set up 2022 to be the year that Kentucky football took the next big step.
With the schedule as manageable as it could be in the SEC, Levis and other big names returning, and even though they would have a new play caller, Rich Scangarello was another NFL guy. Kentucky may not have looked flashy, but they won their first 4 games with relative ease, one of those being a 26-16 win at Florida. And that's where we arrive at our hinge point. October 1st, 2022. Number 7 Kentucky is at number 14 Ole Miss.
Kentucky trails 22-19 with just about a minute to play, but Barryon Brown has made a few guys miss and gotten the Cats inside the Rebel 10-yard line.
The Cats have hurried to the line of scrimmage, and Will Levis is targeting Dane Key for the game-winning touchdown. It's one of the biggest wins of the Mark Stoops era. Barryon Brown and Dane Key are heroes. An inspired Kentucky team then took down South Carolina the following week. They beat Mississippi State to give them their best start since 1950. It set up the biggest Kentucky football game of all time. Number 2 Tennessee versus number 3 Kentucky, where the Vols would escape with a win. Yeah, even in our fantasy dream season, we don't beat Tennessee. But after wins over Missouri and Vanderbilt, we arrive at Kentucky's last chance at the SEC East title. With College Game Day in Lexington, the stage was set. The whole nation has been talking about Kentucky, and Levis, and C-Rod, and Weaver, and Key, and Walker, and Stoops, and what he's done with this program. The game is being broadcast to a record audience for any Kentucky football game. Underneath the lights of Kroger Field, number 1 Georgia versus number 5 Kentucky.
Kentucky versus Georgia, the winner to go to the SEC championship.
Regardless of who wins, the statue in front of Kroger Field is being built, and when Mark Stoops does leave, Kentucky fans are devastated. However, that's not the timeline we ended up on. Because back on October 1st of 2022, just as Kentucky fans were celebrating a potential game-winning touchdown, a yellow flag lay on the field. A split-second difference in the ball being snapped and Barry on Brown getting set changed everything.
That was the Ole Miss game, which is, oh my goodness, I truly think if we win that game, that season is a lot different.
Before that Ole Miss game, Kentucky was 11-6 in their last 17 SEC home games.
Following the loss to Ole Miss, Kentucky would go 2-10 at home in the SEC.
In the last 3 seasons, Vanderbilt has just as many SEC wins at Kroger Field as Kentucky does.
The decline culminated into a 41-14 thumping from Louisville, the cherry on top of a disgusting 4-8 campaign.
To help us understand the world better, we'd like to point to one singular event as to why massive change may have happened.
If you wanted to point to a singular event that changed the course of history and the trajectory of Kentucky football, you could point to that call down in Oxford. It was the right call, but like Adam Luckett has said,
bang, bang, right? Like
yeah.
He's putting his foot
they
back.
usually give it to him, right? They usually give it to him.
Yeah.
But of course, it's almost always more complicated than just one singular event.
Franz Ferdinand's assassination alone didn't lead us to the First World War,
And the illegal motion isn't the only reason Kentucky football started to trend downwards. But I can't help but think about that Levis quote.
I truly think if we win that game, that season is a lot different.
So maybe it was a different singular event from the Ole Miss game. Maybe it was the blocked extra point or the missed field goal.
Maybe it was Jeremy Flax getting hurt that led to the strip sack.
But it's very likely that it was the safety Kentucky took earlier in the game.
Foot caught up under a D lineman, and then I fall on my finger or on my hand, and my finger like gets crushed, and I get up, and it's like sideways.
There is an argument for claiming that one play cost Kentucky at least 2 wins in 2022.
And as I was trying to throw it away, and then not only that, a couple seconds later, I realized, oh, my foot is actually up too. So
That meant Kentucky would have to play a must-win game against South Carolina without their star quarterback. If Ole Miss seemed inspired to beat up Will Levis that day, that's probably because they were. The week of the game, offensive coordinator Rich Scangarello told the media that he welcomed the Ole Miss blitz,
which Lane Kiffin obviously took personally.
Well, they rushed them. You know, they were motivated all week by their offensive coordinator saying, bring the blitz and we'll light you up. So there you go.
Who knows if things would have been different had Rich Scangarello not uttered those words.
But over the course of the 2022 season, Skang would make enough errors outside of the press conferences that Mark Stoops would need to fire him after just 1 season.
Which brings us to the next part of the multifaceted downfall of the Kentucky football program.
A lot of times, a turning point for a program or coach's tenure doesn't even happen on the field.
A big reason for this program's success came from the man who built the Big Blue Wall, John Schlarman. Schlarman passed away after a 2-year battle with cholangiocarcinoma, an extremely rare cancer and even rarer for someone 43 years old. The offensive line has hardly been the same since. But in 2022, the offensive line was probably good enough that had Liam Cohen returned, they probably do win 10 games. If any of these things don't happen, there's a decent to very good chance Kentucky has a 10-2 season at minimum in 2022. A 10-win season followed by a year with a 10-win regular season could have changed the course of history. And not just for Kentucky football, a lot of things around college football would look very different had that happened.
Mark Stoops may be coaching somewhere else right now and doing really well. But on our timeline, he is here at Kentucky, and we just went 4-8.
There is a cruel irony to the epilogue of this story.
In 2024, Kentucky's lone SEC win came against Ole Miss, the same team that derailed their dream season 2 years prior. That victory eliminated Ole Miss from the college football playoffs. A bitter twist of fate for Lane Kiffin.
Throw a go route. That's not anything he's probably ever done in his life.
And for Kentucky and Mark Stoops, sweet retribution.
The The Kentucky football fan base is the most resilient I've ever been a part of, and I grew up a Cubs fan. We care. We care despite being told for most of our lives that we don't compete for championships, that the best that we could hope for is that every once in a while we beat someone who does. There were years where we went to games where there was no chance Kentucky was going to win. That was us, really 65,000-ish or so strong, all hoping against all odds for a Kentucky win. We had big moments in the past, but Mark Stoops did things that I just didn't think were possible here.
Who's the real blue white?
Things like beating Florida. Or beating Tennessee with a quarterback at quarterback. Under Mark Stoops, we began to dream, and that's why it sucks we are where we are right now.
That's what we do, Mark Stoops. Kentucky's here to stay in the East, baby. Let's go.
2022 was the season that Kentucky was supposed to become a real contender for college football supremacy. 2022 was supposed to be Kentucky's year. That touchdown was supposed to count. Instead, that flag became emblematic of Kentucky football's eternal struggle to climb into another region of the college football hierarchy. A reminder of how fragile success in the SEC can be when one moment, one misstep changes everything.